So it's time for our afternoon recap of the Trump criminal trial in Manhattan. I'm Ben Meiselas, joined, of course, by Karen Friedman Agnifilo. And each and every day we have our scorecard where we summarize what took place that day or any specific day at the trial. This is Trump trial day 6, Tuesday. Here's what went down today. And then, Karen, I want to get your take on everything that occurred. There was the contempt hearing that was held early in the morning when the proceedings started. Justice Merchan said that Donald Trump's lawyers were quickly losing credibility with him after certain statements that they made to say that Donald Trump was trying to comply with the gag order. He's working really hard, Judge. You should know that. And Justice Merchan said, "You're losing credibility with me, Mr. Blanche," referring to Donald Trump's lawyer. The judge has not yet made a ruling on the contempt motion. The district attorney's office stated that they would be bringing another application for contempt based on other statements that Donald Trump made yesterday, and that has not yet, I believe, been filed, but that will be filed. There'll be another contempt hearing, I think, on that. The direct exam of Pecker continued, who I think was a devastating witness against Donald Trump, who laid out the catch and kill scheme with the Trump campaign for the benefit of the campaign. Pecker laid out in very concise and clear detail that this was a deal made to help Donald Trump's 2016 campaign. While there were some aspects initially that could be beneficial for Pecker's publications like the National Enquirer and others to get these stories, ultimately killing the stories was not a benefit to Pecker or his entities that he controlled, but it was intended to be a benefit for the Trump campaign. That was the deal that was worked out at a meeting where Donald Trump was present, and then that Pecker worked in concert with that deal. Pecker talked about how he then worked thereafter with Michael Cohen in furtherance of a deal made in a room where Donald Trump was present. And on numerous occasions during the testimony, Pecker explained how this was purely to benefit the Trump campaign. And then at the end of the proceedings, Donald Trump went out and he did his whole whining routine that he did. And he went out with that picture book that he did again with those stories that he has a person on his payroll print out for him. And Trump was whining that he can't read the articles, that there's so many that he's having trouble reading the articles. He also said in that press conference that he's having trouble sitting up straight, he said. And then earlier in the day, he whined that there weren't protesters there on his behalf. And yesterday he was posting how there are people who protest other things. So why aren't there protesters for him? And then when he showed up today, he said he wanted there to be protesters, and he lied and said the protesters want to be here, but there are police barricades preventing the protesters, which is just entirely 100% false. So, Karen, want to hear from you, your take on the testimony that we heard. We of course, want you to be safe. We know that you are in a moving train, and that people hear in the background the sound. Karen's in a train, but that's not going to stop us from being able to give these summaries. So, Karen, what are you able to discuss? Karen's got her handy mic right there.
Hi.
Hey, Karen.
Hi. So sorry, everybody. I'm on a train and someone just came and sat next to me. So I apologize that there's going to be some background noise. Anyhow, today was a big day in court. It started with the morning where, as you pointed out, Ben, we had the violations of the gag order where it did not go well at all. Anytime the judge is saying to the lawyers, to Todd Blanche, you are losing your credibility with me, that is not a good place to start out. That is not a good place to be. As a lawyer, your credibility is everything, and you absolutely need a judge to believe what you have to say and to understand that that when you say something, it is accurate. You're an officer of the court first, and you represent your client second. And so that was very problematic. There were several arguments that the judge seemed to be having issue with that. Todd Blanche was saying. So one of the arguments that I think the judge said was just really seemed disingenuous was the fact that because the prosecutor only brought forth, I think, 10 violations of the gag order. They didn't bring forth all of the various times Donald Trump talked about all these individuals, that therefore they waived. It seemed like that they thought that the gag order had been waived. Makes no sense whatsoever. Another argument that they made that seemed to lack credibility is when the language, I think, was that Donald Trump was claiming to be, he thought that he was staying within. Wrote down.
We'll get back to, let's see, Karen, if you're still there. Yeah, Karen. I think we can hear you now.
I'm still here. Can you hear? Can you hear me?
Now. We hear you now.
So when he said that Trump was trying very hard to comply with the gag order or with the court's order, that's when the judge says, I'm sorry, you're losing me. You're losing credibility. So he did not find any of that, any of those arguments. Absolutely, this.
And I think as Karen gets situated with her Wi-Fi, she's on the train right now. What I'd like to show, and Salty, I think we have these. I want to show some of these clips of Donald Trump leaving the courthouse as Karen's Wi-Fi gets situated there on the train. And so after today's proceedings, Donald Trump left the courthouse, and he was complaining how he can't read the printouts that they're printing for him. I think we perhaps have that. Can we play that clip?
And even having to do with articles, somebody writes an article. If I read every one of these articles incomplete, I read some of it and I'll look at headlines, all good headlines, and the case is a sham. But I can't read the whole thing. I'd be reading, this is like reading a novel. So I put an article in, and then somebody's name is mentioned somewhere deep in the article, and I end up in violation of a gag order. I think it's a disgrace. It's totally unconstitutional. I don't believe it's never, not to this extent, ever happened before.
That was Donald Trump whining. Karen, let's just check if you're back.
I'm having connection issues.
Yeah, as Karen figures out, and we could fix the. Are you there, Karen? Are we able to?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
We hear you.
Can you hear? Okay, great. So yeah, so the judge was not having any of this, and the judge was not buying any of these arguments. The judge very much welcomes a vigorous and rigorous advocacy on behalf of a client, but not to the point where you're making arguments that are not that actually make you lose credibility. You can't do that if you're a lawyer. So that did not go well at all for Trump and his team. You don't want to lose the judge, especially this early on. Then, as you just played that tape, that Trump says that the judge isn't allowing him to speak, that he wanted to put all these articles into evidence, which makes no sense whatsoever. First of all, the judge be held in contempt or not, and if these are going to be considered violations. But the judge was like, of course, reposting is making a statement. And by the way, you didn't just repost that Jesse Waters statement, that quote, you had to type that out yourself and then put quotation marks around it. That doesn't make it somehow now that this is not your statement, that you're not making this statement. So the judge was having none of that. This was a really did not go well at all for Todd Blanche and Donald Trump. So I think there's no doubt in my mind that the judge is going to rule against Trump, and let's see what he does and how he sanctions him. But the fact of the matter is, Trump complained when he got out of court saying can't talk. He can't talk about the case. That's not true. He absolutely can. He just have, and you testify. That's where you can talk about the case. You can say all the things that you're trying to say. He also said that he's not allowed to put, because of the gag order, he's not allowed to put that stack of newspaper articles in to evidence. That has nothing to do with it. In a criminal case, you would never be allowed to put just positive news stories in, as if the jury was supposed to hear that this is what reporters think about your case, and somehow then therefore that's evidence in a case and the jury's supposed to consider it. So that has nothing to do with the gag order. Those articles wouldn't come in at all. At a trial, you're not allowed to have hearsay. You're allowed to speak under oath yourself on, and that's what you can do. That's what witnesses have to do. It's not like a civil trial. This is a criminal trial where everybody has to come in. They have to raise their right hand and swear to tell the truth, and they have to give firsthand testimony. Everyone who's ever watched television, watch Law and Order, my favorite show, they know what lawyers stand up and say, here, objection, hearsay. Everybody knows hearsay is not allowed. Okay, hearsay is defined as an out-of-court statement offered for the truth of a matter asserted. Okay, that you cannot go in. You cannot say. There are certain hearsay exceptions, but positive newspaper articles do not fall into any of those exceptions. So that was the gag order testimony today, which I thought was extremely contentious for a contempt hearing. I mean, you can tell Judge Merchan is not happy about this.
Karen, what about the witness, David Pecker, his testimony today? What do you make of? Did you think it was damaging, more damaging than you expected? You know, did the prosecution deliver on what it said it was going to show in the opening statement? Any surprise moments for you?
Yeah, look, David Pecker is somebody that doesn't get a lot of attention in the press, right? Or from Donald Trump or from others. You know, you always hear about this trial and it's going to be Stormy Daniels, and you're going to hear from Michael Cohen, and you hear Donald Trump say all the things he says about those two individuals. I don't think I appreciated how powerful and what a blockbuster witness David Pecker would be. I knew he was good because he could provide some background and some context. But he's much more than that. He's an actual co-conspirator to this criminal conspiracy. So David Pecker was the head of AMI, which American Media Inc., that owned the National Enquirer. And he testified, first of all, he and Donald Trump were very, very close over the years, like very close. They talked all the time. They talked regularly. And when he provided context that the way this came about was that when Donald Trump had The Apprentice, that show did well and it got good ratings, and Donald Trump would give David Pecker the ratings. David Pecker would publish those ratings, and all of a sudden he would sell all these newspapers and these magazines, and Donald Trump would be happy because he'd get all this publicity. So it was a symbiotic relationship where they were both getting something out of it. They were close friends, and they stayed close friends until 2017 when they had a falling out, but we haven't learned about that yet in court. But essentially, he said when Trump decided to run for president, that's when Michael Cohen and David Pecker and Donald Trump got together and devised this criminal conspiracy where they decided that they were going to basically manufacture or amplify negative stories about Trump's opponents and catch and kill. Positive stories about Trump's opponents. They were going to have those published. Wait, no, I'm getting it backwards. Sorry. They were going to publish negative stories about Trump's opponents and positive stories about Trump, but then they were going to catch and kill negative stories about Trump. Okay, I got that right. And how they got together and decided to do this, and how the problem is you hear a lot of conversation and a lot of discussion that paying hush money is not a crime. And that is true. It is not a crime. But the problem is, and the reason this becomes a crime is because when Trump became a candidate, okay, and David Pecker went out and paid for these stories so that they wouldn't hurt the campaign, that's going to be considered an in-kind campaign donation, okay? And so that's exactly what they're saying, and that's their theory of the case. There's a court case. I was on CNN with Tim Parlatour, one of Trump's former attorneys today, and he was saying, no, it's not a crime. There's Citizens United. Citizens United came down and said, that's not a crime. And I said to him afterwards, I said, that's the difference between a prosecutor and a defense attorney, because I would argue that that paying for these stories is a crime and is an in-kind campaign donation. Citizens United was about a documentary that someone made that contributed to someone's campaign, but it wasn't specifically like they got together with the campaign and paid someone off, that there was money exchanged and an agreement to do this. So I would argue that that's still a crime. Anyway, that's the prosecution's theory, that they were co-conspirators. And the reason that's important is because that's one of the hearsay exceptions. Remember, we were talking a few minutes ago about how hearsay is not allowed in court. One of the exceptions to the hearsay rule is if you have a co-conspirator statement. You don't have to charge someone with a conspiracy. You just have to have a conspiracy, and there has to be, which means two or more people get together and make an agreement, and they make an agreement to commit a crime together, and they do some act in furtherance of that conspiracy. So you don't have to charge it to fall into this category. Just to note, you know how Ben, the crime that he's charged with is falsifying business records, which is a misdemeanor. It becomes a felony if you're doing it to conceal or cover up or commit a crime. One of the crimes they allege is a state election crime, which is a conspiracy. So there is a conspiracy in this mix as well. I know it's very confusing, but for, when you like to geek out on like SEPA and those kinds of things, this is where I go. I'm like, oh, this is a hearsay exception, co-conspirator statement, whatever. So that's how all this stuff is coming in. And but let me tell you the things that I thought was just absolutely incredible, like that came out that was very, very strong for the prosecutor today. First of all, he talked about how Trump is extremely detail oriented, down to the point where he's a micromanager. And so he said, in fact, he would be in the room when invoices and checks, certain in other invoices, someone would bring it in to him and Trump would sign a check, but he'd read that invoice, he'd see what it is. He was very involved. He wasn't just some head of a corporation. It was a small family office, and he was involved in every single detail that went, in every single dime that went in or out the door. He was, in fact, he cared a lot about that. He's very frugal, and that was his reputation. The other thing that I thought was very interesting is how much he corroborates Michael Cohen. And one of the things that the prosecution talked about in their opening is that they plan on corroborating a lot of, if not everything, of Michael Cohen, partly because Michael Cohen is a flawed witness from the standpoint of a prosecutor, because he has a conviction for lying under oath. And so that's always going to be an issue. For a prosecutor. So they're going to try to corroborate everything. And David Pecker corroborates so much. He corroborates very much that once the campaign began, they agreed that he would be the eyes and ears, and he would run these negative stories about the opponents and positive stories about Trump, that women would be selling stories, and Trump, and they had a phone call, they talked about it on the phone, and Trump basically told Pecker, you deal with Cohen. Cohen is going to be the guy you deal with these stories. Trump told David Pecker that, okay, from now on you deal with Cohen. And that's what he did. He dealt with Michael Cohen all the time, and they worked out this arrangement. It was an agreement among friends, he called it. It was not in writing, that he was going to do these things. So one of the headlines they brought up that they ran for Donald Trump was that he's the healthiest president. He's the healthiest individual ever elected which is such a strange statement. Like that's one of the headlines they ran. And, apparently, according to Pecker, Cohen would call and say, run a negative story on Ted Cruz, or, even though Cohen was not part of the campaign, he was Trump's personal attorney, but he was very, very much involved in this. So, it's interesting to me too, because at one point there was a very small point that David Pecker said. He goes, when asked, he said he did not recall if Cohen ever told him. Pecker did not recall if Cohen ever shared with Pecker that that Cohen shared some of these headlines with the boss, with Trump. And I thought that was a really good point, and I'll tell you why. If I'm the prosecutor, I'm going to sum up on that point. If David Pecker were making this up, he would have made it better. He would have made it stronger. He would have said, oh, Cohen told me all the time that he would tell Donald Trump this or not that, because obviously that would help the case, right? But instead, he's not. He's telling it like he knows it. He's telling the facts as he sees them. Some are good for the case, some aren't so good for the case. So I thought that was a pretty good point, and made Pecker seem really credible. Like he's not out to go get Donald Trump, or he's not in bed with the prosecution. And don't forget, David Pecker was given immunity by the feds. Okay, so that's why he's not being prosecuted, and that applies to the state because of the constitutional supremacy clause. If the feds give immunity, it applies to the state. There's a whole back and forth about Steve Bannon, where I guess Trump introduced Pecker to Steve Bannon, and the defense did not want that in, and they had a bunch of objections to that, and the prosecution decided to move on from that. So I'm not sure what that was going to be, and then they got into the stories. They got into the stories. They got into the doorman that they said they were able to debunk that story, but that they were going to that they paid for that story so that it wouldn't run. But this is another really incredible fact that he said. Pecker said, if it had been true, we were going to kill it for the election. But if it was true, I was going to publish it after the election. So that flies in the face that this was to protect Melania, right? Because otherwise, if this was all to protect Melania, then, and his family and that personal reputation, then it wouldn't matter if it was before the election or after the election. But they were just doing this before the election, which goes to the motive and the criminal intent. And that's the entire prosecution's theory. So they went into a detail about that and about the scheme to find these stories and to suppress them just for the election. Then they get to Karen McDougal, who that Donald Trump had a long-term relationship with. It was over a year. And she was coming forward, and that was going to be a big problem for Trump to have her come forward. Apparently it was reported to the relationship ended because Donald Trump called Karen McDougal's mom an old hag, and to which I guess she pointed out she's the same age as you. And also he had mentioned once that he didn't like her friend's boyfriend who was black, and she didn't like those kinds of statements. So anyway, so that was Karen McDougal, and they started to get through the fact that then court ended at 2:00, and then we are back on Thursday because the court has a calendar day on Wednesdays. So after court, Donald Trump walked outside and made the statements that you played about the gag order, and that's that's how today went. But I thought Pecker was a really compelling witness, much more so than I ever appreciated. Really important.
Karen, first and foremost, I'm in awe of you doing this analysis while you're on the train. I don't know if it makes me more nervous or enjoy this even more. And I don't even want to ask who's sitting beside you. I see a lot of people in the comments saying, I wonder what the people on the train are thinking about Karen. You don't have to actually show me who the person is. Oh man, Karen, I got you answered the question like a good prosecutor. You gave us the answer there, Karen Friedman Agnifilo. Why do you think Justice Merchan reserved ruling on the contempt motion and did not make a ruling today?
I mean, I think he wants to potentially put it in writing. That's what I think. I think he was very upset. I shouldn't say upset, but he was, you could tell he was ticked off that that the judge said that Todd Blanche, he's like, you didn't put any evidence on. You're just telling me that Trump thought this. So I think he thought at the hearing that Donald Trump was going to testify and say, oh no, I really thought I was complying, or this is ambiguous, or I'm really sorry, I won't do it again. He didn't do that. And in fact, the judge offered to let him say under oath what he thought. I think he was going to set him up for perjury. That's what I thought he was trying to do, was to make him go under oath, so that in the future he could be prosecuted criminally for lying to the court under oath. But so because he didn't know in advance, he didn't know what the hearing was going to be, right? He didn't know if there was going to be he didn't know if there was going to be testimony, etc. And so I think he's going to write on it. That's what I think is cool.
And Karen, I want to just share some headlines with you that are just kind of crossing the wire. This one from the New York Times, as reported by Ross Story as well. Logistical nightmare. New York Times is revealing that the Secret Service is making plans for Trump to be jailed. That just broke. Here's a post that someone on Twitter or X did about all the types of stories that David Pecker would be running on Donald Trump's behalf. These are just about Hillary Clinton over and over again. And then there are stories like this about Rubio, about Cruz, and then all the flattering stories for Donald Trump. And then David Pecker made it clear that, while some of the information that Donald Trump and Trump's team gave him could be mutually beneficial, this idea of catching and killing stories, paying people so that he could then not write the stories about them, was purely to help Trump's campaign. And I think Pecker was very clear and concise. We had a meeting. Donald Trump was there. We made a deal. The deal was to provide these benefits exclusively for Trump's 2016 campaign. And I was going to find these bad stories and I was going to kill them to help the Trump 2016 campaign. And then Trump then falsified the business records later on when AMI stopped making those payments. And ultimately when Cohen made that payment to Stormy Daniels, when Donald Trump was not only cheating on Melania with McDougal, but cheating on McDougal with Stormy Daniels on the one night he wasn't with McDougal while Melania had just given birth to Barron. Karen, any kind of last statements that you want to make about where we are now? As you mentioned, there's not going to be trial on Wednesday. So we'll start again our recaps Thursday morning, although you and Michael Popak will be doing a Legal AF tomorrow night to recap where we are. But anything else you want to say to everybody watching right now about today's proceedings? Maybe who you think is going to be the next witness, how long you think Pecker's going to keep going? What else you got? Karen, if you're able to hear.
Can you hear me?
I hear you now.
I don't know if you can hear me. I think I'm frozen. Okay. So I think two things are happening. I think number one, we need to think about the gag order, right? We need to pay attention to any further violations. And so I think all eyes should be on that, because what the judge does is very much going to depend on, I think, Donald Trump's behavior for a potential incarceration.
Well, there you have it, folks. Karen Friedman Agnifilo, we certainly appreciate you doing this from the train. And we got in 28 really good minutes of Karen Friedman Agnifilo analysis. For those just joining, you can rewind this. That's one of the great things about YouTube, and you can hear how KFA gave us an incredible breakdown of everything that occurred today. Salty, why don't we just throw up our scorecard from Trump trial day 6, just to recap for everybody what went down. The contempt hearing for Donald Trump's gag order violations occurred first thing in the morning. Justice Merchan reserved his ruling. Karen Friedman Agnifilo gave us the analysis why she thinks that Justice Merchan did that, because she said he's preparing a written order that we'll probably hear about on Thursday or Friday. I hadn't heard that analysis anywhere else, and I think it is absolutely spot on. You then had direct examination of the prosecution's first witness, David Pecker, who laid out the catch and kill scheme deal while Donald Trump was in the room to benefit the Trump 2016 campaign unlawfully, illegally. Pecker laid it out. He admitted to it. Then they gave examples about how they were doing it. And then Donald Trump left the court kind of whining and complaining that he can't read all of the articles that they're printing out for him. And Donald Trump has somebody on the payroll named Natalie Harp, who Donald Trump paid about $105,000 since 2022. When Trump's not in court and on the golf course, she follows him around in a golf cart with the portable printer, and she prints out right-wing media propaganda articles that are flattering to Donald Trump. She hands those to Donald Trump, and he kind of walks around with this picture book that they make for him. And they are doing that again at trial. Natalie Harp is there printing out these articles for Donald Trump, and he was whining and complaining at the end of the day that there's so many articles he's having trouble reading. He's saying that it's really cold in there, and he's saying that he's having trouble staying up, he said, or being present and focusing on what's happening because it's so cold. So anyway, that's your recap of everything that happened today. Tomorrow on Wednesday, no trial, so there's not going to be a morning or afternoon recap from Karen or I, but there will be an episode of Legal AF. Then on Thursday, we'll resume our coverage every morning and every afternoon. Make sure you're subscribed. Y'all may think you're subscribed to this YouTube channel just because you get so many of our videos and you search it every day, but you may not have actually clicked the subscribe button. So make sure you hit subscribe. That goes a long way to help. Make sure you all are subscribed to the Legal AF podcast. 21,000 people watching this live. So I hope there are 21,000 signups on the Legal AF audio podcast. Wherever you get your audio podcast, just search Legal AF and make sure you subscribe. You can hear Karen Friedman Agnifilo and Michael Popak and myself give all the legal breakdowns on the audio podcast as well. Check out MeidasTouch.com for all the breaking news. MeidasTouch.com. And if you like our coverage here, you can support the growth of this independent media platform. We don't have outside investors, yet this is the #1 most watched thing all out there. Also, we got a Political Beatdown coming up as well. Political Beatdown will be up next. I'll be on with Michael Cohen in about 30 or 45 minutes. So check that out. Political Beatdown. I'll be co-hosting with Michael Cohen at 4:30 Eastern, 1:30 Pacific. And if you want to help the growth of this independent media platform, go to patreon.com/MeidasTouch. That's patreon.com/MeidasTouch. Help this platform continue to grow. Thank you all so much. I'll see you at Political Beatdown once again. That'll be in about 45 minutes. That'll be at 4:30 Eastern, 1:30 Pacific, and I'll be co-hosting with Michael Cohen. I'll see you then. Shout out to the Legal AFers. Thank you so much, Karen Friedman Agnifilo, for joining us in the train. I'm always such in awe of Karen Friedman Agnifilo. KFA is the best. See you next time, and shout out to the Meidas Mighty.
Enough! Send it to the big house, not the White House. Get the new exclusive tees, mugs, and stickers right now at store.meidastouch.com. That's store.meidastouch.com.